well, if you don't know what to say, why are you here? And he said, I'm angry because they lied to me and stole 10 years of my life. And what I told him was, say that. Say that.
Hello and welcome to the How Shall We Live podcast. We face a lot of systemic crises in the world today. Things like climate change, AI risk, housing affordability, mental health epidemic, and many more. We often think that these problems require systemic solutions and only an entity like the government can do something about them. Our own roles are mostly limited to voting for the representative that we think will be best aligned with our interests. We do so every 4 or 5 years, and in the middle, we exercise precious little control. If the lawmakers don't end up following our interests, then there is very little that we can typically do. But what if it didn't have to be this way? What if we could hold the politicians accountable every single week and actually get a say on every single law that they discuss? That is the promise of Civic Dashboard Toronto, a volunteer run project over here in Canada, which promises to make democracy in Toronto more accessible and accountable to everyday residents. I'm joined today by Ilya Kreynin, who is one of the founders and the animating force behind this project. In this episode, we talk about how common residents can exercise their agency and drive systemic change, not just using Civic Dashboard, but also by starting similar projects of their own. There are a lot of nuggets in there about finding hope, organizing people, and driving change. I learn a lot every single time that I talk to Ilya, and I hope that you'll find this conversation informational and valuable. Hey Ilya, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being the first guest on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's like a conversation, but we record it.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, what was it that people said about podcasts? Two tech bros mansplaining things to each other. So
Absolutely. But as long as it's just to each other, you know what I mean? I think like that's the important piece about it.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so Ilya, I really wanted you on here because you have been on this a very interesting project for the last 1 year or so to make democracy in Toronto more accessible to its residents. So why don't you tell us a bit more about that project?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I and a whole bunch of wonderful people out at Civic Tech Toronto have been working on this project that we call Civic Dashboard. And the one sentence pitch for it is it's a better interface for Toronto city government that is meant to make what is happening in council as accessible and actionable as possible to as many people as possible in the city. The basic idea here is we believe that Toronto is a city of vast civic motivation. There are lots of people who care a lot about at least one thing, if not multiple, that are happening in the city. But that civic motivation rarely translates into direct democratic action, which is really, really possible in our city. And our thought is that this is not because there is insufficient motivation. As we said, there's a lot of it. It's that there is a lot of friction between that motivation and action. And that is something that volunteer-built like civic technology can be used to bridge. That if we make a better interface, there could be a broader and better distributed participation in our local democracy, not just during elections, but like any given week, any given month of a term, and that greater participation of that kind is great for our democracy. That it leads to it being more resilient, more representative, more flourishing, more vibrant, and ultimately more useful in achieving better societal outcomes as democracy is wont to do. We think that ultimately it makes our democracy more democratic, and we think that this project could go a long way in doing so, both in Toronto, and that projects like this already have and can continue to do so around the world. That's Civic Dashboard, or that's the highfalutin version. The basic version of it is it's a website that tells you how city council works, what is happening that is relevant to you and when, and exactly what you can do about it, and makes that whole process as easy as possible.
Okay. Perfect, perfect. Let's unpack that a little more. When people typically think about democracy, they think about having the right to vote. Once in 4 or 5 years, we turn up at the voting booths and cast our votes, and things go on from there. Or at the other end, there are things like activism, protests, and making the your voice heard in those kind of
Mhm.
forums. Um, what's the different thing with Civic Dashboard? You're tapping into a different lever for action in some sense over here. So can you tell us a little more about how that city council works and uh, about this lever that people can use?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we really are just trying to bring people to levers that already exist within our city through tons of incredible work that has been done like for decades prior to us. And yeah, we're just trying to be that almost like a last mile delivery for a lot of what is happening in our democracy. So in Toronto specifically, to peel back a few of the layers of how council works, um, we have um, we have our 25 counselors, and they sit on committees. And so these are committees that are responsible for everything from like infrastructure and the environment. So that's where you'd go for things like bike lanes, to like planning and housing. So that's where you'd go for things like advocating for different kinds of housing to be more or less available in different zones. To things that are really specific, like the Toronto Zoo, which is where you'd go to see an item on something like on the matter of upgrades to the orangutan exhibit. And all of these are things that are moderated by these committees that on which councillors mostly sit, but you have some citizens. And before something goes before council to be voted on, ultimately, whether it becomes like a law or a piece of legislation or a piece of policy within the city, it has to pass through these committees. Each whenever these committees meet, there is an agenda, and each piece of potential policy is called an agenda item. Now, what's cool about Toronto is that for the vast majority of these meetings, any resident of Toronto can submit a public comment, so something written that will be visible as part of the public record, or speak, or what's called depute, on any of these items. And they have to let you do it. That is your right as a citizen. And so, or not even as a citizen, as a resident of Toronto. And so this is a really powerful, direct, and specific lever for engaging with and influencing and making your voice heard within Toronto's city government. Now, given how direct and powerful this is, it's kind of a wonder that more people don't engage with it. And we can get into some of the structural reasons why. But the idea behind Civic Dashboard, at least at the outset, we've got lots of big dreams, but the idea at the outset is to make it so that you and people in the city are A, aware that this is a thing, B, know that it is powerful and how to engage with it, and C, that they know when an item relevant to their interest comes up, and are able to sign up to either submit a public comment or speak on it. And that way we are connecting people who are motivated about a thing to the times where it actually really matters for them to lend their voice on that specific thing in the city. And this is like cool and different from a lot of other engagement for like a whole host of reasons. But one of the biggest ones is that it's a really direct way you can engage with government and influence policy like every week of the year. There are items that are coming up on a regular basis that are genuinely influential. And so as an example, you and I both deputed on an item that was to do with allowing sixplexes, so units with or housing with 6 units, to be built throughout the city in way more places than is currently allowed. That is like a really important piece of policy, a really important piece of legislation that would have a big effect on Toronto for decades to come. And the shape of it matters, right? We didn't have to wait for an election for that to happen. We were able to go and speak to that alongside like a bunch of other like voices, both for and against, in the middle of June. And so that is just like one, and we can get into other examples, but that is just one of many examples of where you can be doing this throughout. The second cool piece of this that is different from voting is that you can do it on specific issues. I know a lot of people who would consider themselves like not very political, but there are specific things that they care about a lot. Like they really care about bike lanes, or they really care about noise. They care about some of these like more almost like practical, like close to hand municipal issues that are often not talked about in this like highfalutin like president in front of the people type of way, but that are actually like really affecting in their day-to-day lives. And this is one of the many awesome things about municipal politics. First of all, that it is like very materially felt. And so a lot more people feel a lot more confident like engaging with it, or almost like having what they feel is an informed opinion on it. But secondly, that they are able to speak to it very specifically through this mechanism. They don't have to like even necessarily look up like the councilor's record or the history. They can show up and say, this is what I think about my local park, or this nightclub across from my street, really loud. Or it would be great to have bike lanes in this place, and we're talking about it right now, and I want to lend my voice towards it. So it is accessible, it's specific, and you don't have to wait. And so it is this really, really powerful lever for people to like start engaging with democracy and going from there. And that 0 to 1 is something that's really exciting to our team, and we think has a lot of potential for our city.
Wow. I've already heard you speak about this project multiple times, but just you unpacking that potential over there just got me charged up and excited all over again.
I'm glad.
There are just so many subtle but important points over there. One, which is what you're talking about, engaging with democracy on an issue basis, on a weekly basis, right? That is so tremendously powerful because, like I said, typically we just tend to engage once in 4 years, 5 years, and we voted for a conservative politician, we voted for a progressive politician, they will do whatever it takes. But that's not really the case. We can influence things on an ongoing basis. And really important issues as well. Like you said, make the six plexus issues about making housing more affordable. We deputed in another issue which would relate to technological surveillance. There have been a lot of protests about bike lanes, and there were issues that came up related to that. So it's not small stuff, right? It is very, very tangible stuff. And again, but the most important bit, I think, was the one at the beginning, that people are just not aware that they can do this. Like, we have all this power, but right? Like and it's such a big theme in the world today that we have so many ongoing massive crises: climate change, AI risk, polarization, fake news, etc. And we as ordinary citizens feel disempowered, but we have levers that we are not utilizing, and because we are
Well, and like apathy can feel like a rational response in the face of these things, right? Like it really can, because you look at this thing that is massive and you say, what am I going to do about that? Like, what tangible thing? And like the answer, has often been thrown of like, if you care about climate change, recycle, or like you ride your bike, or like do things like that, or like do these kinds of like small, almost like symptom addressing things. And it's not that those don't matter. I just think that there's been this like increasing awareness that with everybody doing their part, that the parts don't add up to a satisfactory whole. There's, like a broad awareness that these are system level problems. And then it's this question of saying, but what can I do to foster system level solutions? Right? Like that's almost like saying like, oh yeah, you can address the housing crisis by like having a roommate, instead of like advocating for policies that say that we are able to have like denser and therefore more affordable housing, just like as a small example there. I think it also is one of those things where the more that you engage and the more that you feel like you are doing something tangible, the more you build that agency muscle, and the more you feel like you are able to like do more and like do things more often and bring people along with you. But it also becomes more possible because you almost are able to start trusting that others will do the same. I think this, like, addressing these kinds of big issues can often feel like this tragedy of the commons, where you say, oh, but like, am I the only voice here? Like, sure, like, I'll do my part, but are there enough people who are going to do their part? But like when you show up to these things in person and when you bring people along to them, there's a contagious effect. Like you start to see that there is something that you're doing that other people can be doing, and that you don't actually have to be involved on everything. That you can have like your thing that you are, passionate about and you're doing your piece on, and you can see other people doing the same. And you can see that like within your one city, but then it's also possible to start imagining that there are just millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people in the world who are doing the same thing wherever like they live. Like you think of climate change as something that needs to be addressed systemically and on a global basis. But people addressing it systemically on a local basis everywhere is almost a local, global, systemic solution. The one thing that it relies upon is trust. And believing that you have systems within which you can trust lots of people to address these problems where they live. And that's again one of the awesome things about local engagement. And I don't know, I'm a big believer that Toronto could be a huge bellwether on that front.
I love that. I love that. And again, so many important points that you touched in on there. And let's start with the last one. It's about taking these big global issues and breaking them down into the local level, right? I've suffered from this problem quite a lot. Working on climate change, it's easy to think like, oh, our emissions are at 40 billion tons. What action are we going to take globally? The United Nations needs to do something about it, etc., etc. And when you think about the problem at that scale, it just does not feel actionable. But then, once you come to the insight that you are talking about, that emissions, like you can think about it globally, but in the end, emissions have to be reduced at each power plant, at each industry, in each building. You've got to have cycling infrastructure and public transport being built everywhere. You need to have energy efficiency laws everywhere, and you suddenly realize that all those actions have to be taken locally, and then suddenly that problem becomes tractable, because sure, you might not be able to influence the emissions of whole of Canada, but you can take action for something in your neighborhood or in your city, right? And suddenly this problem, like you can move the needle over here, right? So that's wonderful. But there's also the second part which you said about how does this notion of contagiousness and trust, right? Because again, it's all well and good to get excited about the action you are taking, but if others aren't coming along, the global problem still doesn't get solved.
Yeah,
But others do come along.
they do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I might be like annoyingly optimistic about people. But I like truly working on this project over the past year or so has only at every turn reinforced like my like deep optimism and belief about people. That people really care, are willing to do things in like a really conscientious and like selfless, low ego way. And that there is just an abundance of that kind of energy that it's not just that we can tap into it, is that we have to. Because like in a lot of ways, if you like frame a lot of the problems that exist in the world right now as like stemming from incoherent concentrations of power. And like that is the thing that almost like the masses in one way or another are trying to battle against and reorient our systems into ones that like both like serve the many or at least don't doom the many for the temporary benefit of the few. You have to be able to tap into the actions of lots of people. Like this comes down to like slogans like power to the people or like we the people, but those aren't just words. Like they underlie what is really the only possible strategy, right? Like if you are going to try to out centralize power or like out capital or like out war existing systems, you're probably going to fail. Like that's not how David beats Goliath. Like David beats Goliath by undermining him, by saying I'm not playing that game, we're playing our game and we are making the world more the way it ought to be. And that starts with being able to like engage that energy, and almost generate it. I think the other thing there is that like we often think about motivation as a prerequisite for action, and to some extent that's true, but it is a chicken and egg, right? Like taking action creates motivation, and so it's not the question of like step one, pump someone up like crazy. Like a step one could be give someone a tangible action that they can do, and then after that, you telling them that things are possible. It doesn't fall on deaf ears. Like I know if I'm like depressed, despondent, like doom scrolling in my like in my room, you telling me that like big good things are possible, I'm not gonna believe you. Like I personally, Ilya, will not believe you, right? But if you tell me that after like deputing or like after like speaking on a thing, even if that item didn't go my way, like if it did go my way, I'm like awesome, let's do that again. And if it didn't, I'm like the fuck it didn't. I'm bringing 10 friends next time, right? And the thing is like I have 10 friends to bring. They don't. Like that's the like that's there's our power right there, and it's kind of the only one we have. The question is, how do we coordinate it, organize it, and like wield it towards a more just society?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I cannot emphasize on that empowering aspect of it enough. Just showing up at the city council, I just felt so pumped up, and like, and yeah, it really makes you feel that you are in this fight and you can really change things.
Can I
And
flip this on you for a sec? Like, I'd love to hear your experience of it, because I recognize that even working on this for a year, I'm deep in wonkland. Like, I'm an astronaut talking about like agenda items and like the technicalities of council. Like, I'm trying to stay grounded, but like I recognize that I'm pretty gone. Like, I don't say speak at council, I say depute, and that's already language that most people don't know. But like you engaged with this for the first time and then significantly like last week. What was
yeah,
that experience like for you?
uh, like I said, I was just really, really pumped up by the whole. Like there were two issues that we, spoke on. One was the surveillance through self-driving vehicles and how that was being passed without the consent of people. Most people will not have any idea that their faces are going to get recorded by the vehicles, and it really reminded me of the Guardian's tagline: "Democracy dies in the darkness," right? And But there was a forum that was available to speak on it, and because of me being friends with you and this and you having the Civic Dashboard project, there was an avenue to actually become aware of the issue, right? Like shed so this shedding light on the issue, it really like that's why the awareness lever of it is just so important. If you know what is going on, and second, you know you can do something about it, you'll turn up and you can take action. So uh, just just this whole issue made me go like, what the hell is going on? Like how can we be having this techno surveillance kind of seeds being sown everywhere without people's knowledge? But when we turned up there, we saw that the councillors cared about the issue, right? Like
Hmm.
it's possible to feel that in a lot of countries, people think that lawmakers are corrupt or they don't care about the public at all. When you go there, you realize that people do care. There are difficult constraints at play, which might be forcing certain actions. Uh,
Hmm.
but you can, and but what you also realize is that you can lend another perspective to the issue, and the law, which the lawmakers might not be aware of. And if they hear from enough people, right? Like, and I think that is the key part. Then they realize that okay, this is a bigger deal than what we think, and it's going to affect public well-being at large. And then they suddenly are forced to reckon with that, right?
Hmm.
Versus if we hadn't shown up, they're like, okay, it doesn't seem like anybody has a problem with this. We are just going to go ahead and pass this thing. And I felt it even more strongly with the housing issue because there were like 12 or 15 of us like that, who were towards pro housing, and there were a few who were speaking about challenges that they saw with building more housing, and that is a vibrant democracy in action, right? Like you have points both back and forth, uh, and again, if we hadn't turned up, like the pro-housing folks, the councillors would have thought, okay, maybe there's no problem over here. We don't really need to take care of this issue, right? So it felt like a very, very powerful lever to take action, and the law got passed by the committee, right? So
Yeah.
that was such a huge win.
Right. And like still more fight to be done, but you see it. I'll also say like you and I are both like I'll speak for myself, but I think I speak for both of us are both like fairly new to the like housing debate in Toronto, right? Like one that is like it's representative of like a housing crisis that is starting to exist all over the world, but definitely exists in Canada and in Toronto. Like it's one of the biggest problems we have here, right? And like yes, we showed up to say our piece, but over the course of that day and even just interacting with people there, I felt like I came away way more educated on the way that the thing works and motivated to get involved like in the parts like pre and post deputation, right? Of saying like how are like the people at More Neighbors, the organization we came out with, like how are they like thinking about this? Like how are they tracking it? Like what is it that councillors have said for or against this issue before? Like what's going to happen after this thing passes the Planning and Housing Committee? Like what's likely to happen at council? How might we affect that, right? And we weren't the only ones. Like there was somebody who we were there with who was like, okay, like who am I emailing? Like who else am I getting to email them? Yeah. I'll also say I think that this is an important thing that I think creates a lot of friction in terms of people getting engaged. And I think it has a number of reasons for it, but put simply, people think that you need to be an expert to get engaged. And I don't know that there's anybody like pushing this narrative, but the narrative is definitely out there, right? That unless you are like a genuine like expert in housing, unless you are like a civil engineer or a planner, like that this is something that you can't come and speak on, And I remember like the first item we spoke on, the one about like the surveillance from self-driving cars. You and I both have like engineering backgrounds, have like worked in technology companies. Like we have something of a background to speak on this. Although like the main thing that we're speaking on is don't record my face, right? But on the housing one. Like to the extent that we are speaking on that is because we both have physical bodies that require shelter. Like that's our qualification here. But that's actually all you really need. Because like your job is not to show up and say as a technical expert XYZ. Like technical experts do show up and they carry a lot of sway and they should, right? But your job is to show up and say, hey, here is my lived experience in Toronto. Right? And therefore, these are the conclusions I'm drawing, and here's what I want. Like, we have to disabuse ourselves of the notion that we have to be the technical experts. There are staff and planners and brilliant people working in most governments. I'll speak definitely for the government in Toronto. There's brilliant people working there. They are technical experts who can solve problems. Our job is not to give the solutions or to give really detailed solutions. Our job is to say what we want and articulate our problems. And no one is more of an expert on the problems in your life than you. That's the thing there, right? And of course, you're going to learn more about the thing as you show up. But truly, some of the most powerful deputations I've heard don't come from policy experts. They come from people who are like close to the problem. Okay, here's my favorite story on this front. One of the first deputations I ever went to was surrounding Uber driver pay in Toronto. Basically, a report came out that said that the median functional hourly salary or hourly wage for Uber drivers in Toronto was $6 an hour, which is just indentured servitude. Like that's a poverty wage. That means you're working 80 hours a week to be at the poverty line, right? So like just unconscionable set of things there. So I show up, and to my eye, I was like the only person of 50 deputing there who wasn't like working for Uber as a lobbyist, working in the taxi industry, or an activist on behalf of gig workers and Uber drivers, or themselves an Uber driver. So I was there to kind of say like, hey, this is something that regular people care about. Like we can't have this in our city. But before these deputations, I got to talk to a lot of the Uber drivers who were there, right? And they were at council for the first time. They were told to be there by activists who are fighting on their behalf. But they were like, they first of all were like, what is this and how does it work? And so, running early versions of Civic Dashboard with them was useful. But then secondly, they were saying, hey, like English is not my first language and I don't feel like I can speak technically, like, like this is all fancy talk. And I'm talking to one of them, like a guy named Vitaly, who later made the Toronto Star. And I asked him, I'm like, okay, well, if you don't know what to say, why are you here? And he said, I'm angry because they lied to me and stole 10 years of my life. And what I told him was, say that. Say that. You don't have to say anything fancier than that. You can just say, I'm upset because they lied to me. Man, that was easily the most powerful deputation because he went on from there. He is an expert in what it's like to be an Uber driver. Yeah. So, and I think, I don't know, I think we could all really, really learn from him. And if we can like remove that friction and say, if you care about a thing, you can show up, the rest follows. Like that 0 to 1 of showing up and doing it not just on this individual action, but in a systemic way, man, that goes such a long way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful lever. I think it's a good time to talk more explicitly about your theory of change over here. Like,
Yeah.
why is showing up and making your voice heard to the counselors so powerful?
Totally. We can attack this from a number of angles, but I think the most basic one is that this is a way for us to make our democracy much more representative, right? So I think a lot of people's perception of what happens on a democratic level is that, sure, people vote once every 4 years, but then after that, for the most part, the government like operates as it does, and unless things have like a really explicit electoral like outcome, like benefit or punishment, like politicians and staff are going to do what they do, and the only people who like have influence there are like political insiders and lobbyists and such. And I think the truth of that varies like wildly government to government, both like country to country and level to level. But I think a lot of the time, like when I've heard people talk about even Toronto's government, people talk about it as if it is like the federal government in the States, where like you can just buy a senator, and they're like, yeah, like that's the perception, like generally. The thing with a lot of governments, and I'll speak definitely for Toronto's, is that lobbyists and like regular people have actually like pretty similar levels of access. Like they also only get 5 minutes to depute, and they also can request a meeting with a counselor same as you can, right? The difference, of course, is that for them it's a full-time job to do it, and they understand the mechanics of the system and are paid to do it, versus we don't have that amount of time and we don't have that amount of information. So the asymmetry here lies in that, again, they have time and access, but we've got way more people. And so the theory of change here is that if we get more of those people to have the same information that insiders have, if we reduce the information and access asymmetry, then our democracy becomes more representative of the will of that set of people, and that. Putting more people into the process naturally morphs the process into being one that actually is able to intake lots of these people. So let me give you an example of how this doesn't work now and how it could work. Let's go back to this thing we've been talking about of like deputations and speaking. A deputation is, let's call it 3 minutes. It's like 3 to 5, but let's bring it down to 3. So let's say each of them takes 3.5 minutes because you got to change between deputants and sometimes there's questions, right? If that means that if 100 people sign up on an item, that's 350 minutes. So we're talking about like roughly 6 hours. That could happen routinely. There's like items every week that would easily like hundreds of people, thousands, tens of thousands of people in Toronto would really care about and could give 3 minutes to. So, but even 100 people show up, that item clogs up the whole day because they are listened to in series. So right now, the system almost presumes that a lot of people will not show up. I don't think this is done out of malice. I think this is kind of a chicken and egg of people haven't shown up, so you have a system that doesn't expect people to show up, and there's a cycle there. And so right now, getting not like half of Toronto engaged on this, but even going from 0.01% of people engaged to 1% of people engaged will break the system in such a way that it has to be remade in a way that actually is able to more meaningfully take on input. Like the bar for that is quite low. And there's places that have done this. I mean, the most sterling example here is Taiwan. There's a great book about this called Plurality. But that is a society that has, I mean, I think most people would agree, like the most advanced digital democracy in the world right now. It has it under really trying circumstances where they are constantly in the shadow of a hegemon that doesn't believe them to be a country and doesn't want that to be the case. And this vibrant digital democracy was very much started and like pushed forward by civic hackers, people who kind of like we are, took data from government websites and then made interfaces that were far more useful and engaging and engaged with by the populace, to the point where, first of all, it increased the level of democratic participation, but second of all, some of those interfaces were actually re-ingested into the government. And at the point in time when they had kind of like a peaceful revolution called the Sunflower Revolution, one of the outcomes of that was the government really seeing the wisdom of this way of working and starting to have like a minister of digital affairs, putting like engagement czars inside every individual department in their government. But all of this started with people building the world that they want to see. So yeah, that's the theory of change here, is that we can build the information pathways and reduce the information asymmetry for a large number of people in Toronto, the same way that it has been done elsewhere. And in doing so, change the physics of the system by just putting people into it, by bringing like the demos to the Crusty, to break up the word. Yeah, that's the basic of it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I love that you broke it down, saying like the bar for it also is just so low, right? Like it's
Pretty low.
yeah, like if you get even 100 people to show up for an issue, it fundamentally changes how the system works. That feeds into this whole notion that we have, like, oh, even if I take action alone, nobody else is going to do it. Like it's okay.
You can imagine 100 people.
Yeah,
Like
it's,
that's
yeah.
yeah. Like especially,
You
I
get
mean,
10 friends, I get 10 friends.
exactly. And some of those friends have friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
No, the other thing that I wanted to emphasize over here in terms of the how this drives change is, like you said, typically it's the lobbyists who end up showing up to talk about these issues. And if I were a politician and I am listening to the lobbyist or some other invested group talking about this, I'm going to think that that is the main crux of the issue and that is what people care about. And since as a politician, my incentive is to remain in power, to get elected again and again. And
Yeah.
if I'm hearing that is what people want, I'm going to go and do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
If suddenly 50 people show up and they're saying like, no, that is not what we want, it's going to flip my incentives, right? Because I'm going to think like, okay, no, these are the people I represent. This is what they want. And I think that really changes their thinking, right? Because in the end, like no politician is going to think of going against the people's will because, like I said, their incentive is to remain in power.
Totally. And like, I mean, that's such a good point. And like to go one better here, right? Elections are once every 4 years. I think consciously or subconsciously, many politicians make the calculation that like most things will be forgotten, right? Like you do like a couple of things that piss off like some small number of people, and maybe those people don't vote for you, and maybe they tell one or two other people not to vote for you. But for the most part, people know what they are told during like the campaign, right? And that's about that, right? Having more people engaging more frequently changes that in a number of ways, right? Like if you have lots of people routinely showing up, like you can bet that those people are also talking to the people near them, right? So you don't need half the city showing up, right? If you've got like 1% of people who are like highly engaged instead of 0.1%, that 1% is friends with like 10 to 20%, right? Like the overall level of engagement in the city goes up dramatically, which means that these things that used to be details are now real things that lots of people know about. and like that changes that incentive. I mean, the other piece here, and like this is a page that like we have and are building out at civicdashboard.ca, is having a really easy way to parse your counselor's record and what they have done as it relates to your interests. Right now, there's not a very easy way to do that. It's something that you need to have a fair bit of political expertise and context to do. And those things matter, don't get me wrong. But I should be able to like easily say, okay, how has my counselor voted on housing related things in my ward? And be able to like read that, like both for yourself. I mean, we're working on non-hallucinating AI summaries, but to be able to read that for yourself, and then to see like what motions they have or haven't supported, like what their record has been, and to be able to do that both like before an election, but also throughout. Right? That way, you know, what you have actually done on a vote by vote basis is not just something that you can engage with as an individual citizen, but also something that matters to the counselor, because they know that this is a thing that will be looked at, that can be looked at by more people. And so it's not even a question of like what's in their hearts. Functionally, the incentives of the system start being towards doing more of the things that people want. And so when you bring the people closer to government, government starts acting more in a way that is more closely aligned to the people. It's bidirectional.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And at this point that you said like about reminders of the voting record, yeah, it's so powerful. And I remember when you first told me about it, I was like, that's freaking brilliant, because in this whole theory of change that you've talked about, nowhere are you dependent on some kind of big external funding or changing something fundamental in the system. You are utilizing the existing incentives in the system, and like the biggest thing that you're doing is just increasing awareness and accessibility, and just by that, the nature of that, like the system starts flipping.
Totally. I mean, okay, so there's like so excited about those parts of it. There's like two parts of that to dig into, right? One is like, how does a project like this even come together? Right? And like the whole world of civic technology. And then the second piece of like all the giants, the shoulders of whom we stand on, right? Like, I don't know, like I feel, and I think I would say like most of our team feels, like everybody else has already done the really hard work and we're just doing like last mile delivery here, right? Like there are already people who, like, for one, like, fought for democracy to exist, you know? There's people who fought for being able to show up or submit public comment to individual, like, agenda items. You know, we didn't do that. That's already a thing that existed. There's a whole open data team at the City of Toronto who makes things like councillor presence or absence and, like, their voting record available as a piece of data that anybody can ingest. The Toronto Municipal Management Information System, TMMIS, which is where we pull a lot of our data, that being open and accessible, like we didn't have to like hack or scrape the websites. You know, we were potentially ready to, but we didn't have to. That's available, and like other people work with that data. You know, like there's already all of these like advocacy groups who have been like bringing people to these deputations and like training them for a long time in Toronto. You know, like some that come off the top of my head, like Progress Toronto does this, Cycle Toronto does this. I think the Toronto Environmental Alliance like has done this, like these kinds of deputation write-ups and trainings. You know, like all of this infrastructure already exists. We didn't have to do that, and nor did we invent any of the like open source tooling that we use. We didn't bring the group of like Civic Tech Toronto, which has been going for 10 years and where we work out of together. Like all of these pieces already existed. We just had to decide to start like bringing them together towards these ends. And that kind of leads to this world of civic technology, of people mostly on a volunteer basis building technology to strengthen public life and the commons. And this has been like almost more than anything the like most inspiring thing of working on Civic Dashboard. Because like I'll say this, like my main skill is as a cheerleader. Like I am a big fan of like bringing people who I think are loads smarter than me into a room and saying, no, you could totally do this, right? Like that's my main thing I do. and then occasionally vomit a stream of words in a direction, right? Like otherwise, like I haven't designed a pixel, I haven't coded a line, I've barely written like a word that is like currently on the website. Like I haven't done any of that. This has been done by a team of 35 people on an entirely volunteer basis. Like nobody has been paid a dime, nobody's asked for it, nobody like really like expects it going forward. And yeah, it's been something where again our first question wasn't where do we get funding. Our question is like what can we do? What's possible? And like digital technology like really rewards that kind of thinking. I think it's also kind of different from a lot of other infrastructure in the sense that you don't have to remove the thing that's already there to build the thing you want. Right? Like if you were to look at like a single family home and say, oh, but what if this were an apartment building or a sixplex? You can't just imagine an alternate reality in which that apartment building is in that place, right? You have to say, hey, we got to remove that single family home and put an apartment building there. In our case, we can fork it. We don't have to take down the city's website to create an alternative, right? Like we can make a separate tool and people can choose what they use. And that's wonderful. The fact that you can fork democracy in this kind of way. Yeah, so there's just like a lot that comes together to make this possible. But you're right, we don't have to ask for permission or forgiveness. Like we can just do the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Love that. So it's so powerful, and I love the things that you mentioned over there. Like in some ways, this is a project built on the shoulder of giants, right? Like this.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. This thing called democracy, which we not just take for granted, we often abuse, right? Like it is such an amazing invention. It's a great social technology, and it was built by generations upon generations of people, and of course it's our task now to adapt it for the challenges of the 21st century, and those are really big challenges.
Yeah.
But like you said, like it's the bar for making a difference is not that big, right? Like if we just exercise that agency muscle, we could do it.
Totally.
Yeah, but I think it might be a good time to show people what the actual website, the tools look like, and
Sure.
then,
Yeah.
maybe talk a bit more after that about Civic Tech Toronto and the genesis of this project, right? How did you come to realize that something like this might be needed and go about building it?
100%. Sure. Let's demo the thing here. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. This is civicdashboard.ca. Anybody can visit it. And I'll focus on our three kind of core features, lots more in the oven, and go from there. So the first one is we just have a How Council Works page. This is a text document that tells you how council works, and it might actually be the most useful thing on the site. We made this because we needed it as we were onboarding people onto the project. We realized that we didn't have one link to send them. And if we couldn't onboard people, then onboarding users is a whole other layer of difficulty. So this is just a document that outlines how it is that the council process works. We've got a brilliant research team that is currently working on making a people-powered wiki to delve deeper into all kinds of terms like city council, terms like wards, councilors, deputations and whatnot. And our vision for this is for it to be something that both tells you how the city works and how it really works, like pooling together a lot of the lived experience and experiential learnings that exist within people who engage with the city in Toronto. Second page I'll shout out is one that we've talked about on this podcast, which is just our councillor records page. So if we say here, take a look at Councillor Amber Morley, we see here are all of the items that she has voted on in this council session. So some of these have AI summaries. We're working on making that available for all of them. But for any given item, you can see the decision body that this happened within, how the councillor voted, and everything else that happened with that individual item. And so our next steps here are putting on tags and filters here, and also giving you the ability to follow these individual items alongside these AI summaries, which are things we've tested on a couple of items, but we want to make damn sure that they don't hallucinate or editorialize before we put them on our site. And the last one here, and perhaps like we could say the heart of the website, is the actions page. So over here, you can see all of the items or the agenda items that are available for you to act on. So for you to take action by either submitting a comment or requesting to speak on in the city. And so these are the ones that are available right now. So the ones that are happening in the future. You can use this to see past items, but we're pretty focused on stuff that is happening in the future. You can filter it for things like, for example, bikes. And so here you see that there are like 2 bike-related items that exist right now. For example, this one is about having e-bikes or like lithium-ion battery-powered e-bikes on the TTC, and that's been a conversation that's been happening in the city for a while. There's another item about it coming up in 4 days. And so you can see this, and then you can take action on it. But of course, we don't want you to have to visit this website every day for you to see what's going on that is relevant to your interest. So basically, alongside with these other filters, whichever filter you put in, you can choose to get email alerts. So here you can put in your email and click subscribe, and whenever an item that fits your interest comes up, it will hit your email, and from there you can again act in one click. And acting in this case, like submitting a comment or requesting to speak, is as simple as like we open up a templated email to you that like morphs to the item you want to speak on and like the body you would speak in front of or submit a comment to. And there you just sign up to speak or comment, and you go from there. So those are our 3 core functions. How council works, where you figure out how it works. Your counselors, where you see your counselor's record and figure out where you do and don't align with it. And lastly, actions, which is where you can presently or for future sign up to know when things that are relevant to you are happening and be able to take action on them in as low friction a way as possible. Now, we forever have so many things that we want to be building, but and like, you know, we've got a public backlog. In general, we're a completely open organization. But yeah, that's the core of the website right now. And we've got lots of people, potentially even yourself, dear listener, working on it. Always accepting feedback, always accepting contributions.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I think it's a very, very slick interface, and it just removes so much of the friction and making those little design tweaks, right? Like write an email directly from there, submit a comment directly from there. I think that goes a long way. People don't have to spend time figuring out the mechanics. I think you had mentioned to me in one of our previous chats that you're also going to be emailing folks about the records of the councillors right before the elections, right? Like so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're excited about, right? Like you almost imagine like Spotify Wrapped, but for your counselor. Yeah, like basically, like the core theory is that counselors are more likely to like think deeply about the alignment of their votes if they know that people will be reminded of them shortly before election time. And also that people will be more motivated to show up and do things like submit public comments and do deputations if, again, they know that their counselors will be reminded of them shortly before election time. It's almost like an automated reinforcing of the democratic contract of you do what I want, I elect you. You don't do what I want, I don't elect you. Which is, in theory, though it's very much like how our democracy still works and is the theory we operate under. But in practice, we know there's a lot of noise there. And so we seek to reduce that level of noise and bring counselor activity back more in line with that theory.
Yeah, I love it. This reminds me of this leadership principle that Amazon has. It's called good intentions don't work, only good mechanisms do. And what you're saying about like this is how our democracy works in theory, but there is a lot of noise. But now you have put in place the good mechanism to actually enforce it.
Totally. And here's the thing: like none of this is with any like suspicion or assumption of malice of counselors, even counselors with whom I like politically disagree with. Right? It's to say, like, I genuinely believe that most of them are like looking to do good work and do it like on behalf of their constituents. We hope to make us like their opinion honestly matters to me less than to our team, less than the opinions of the people in the democracy. But we're not like looking to antagonize them, right? Like, we hope to have counselors who are excited about this set of incentives. And if there are counselors who are not excited about this set of incentives, I would love to hear either why they think this is the wrong set of incentives, or I would love for them to be better incentivized by the will of their people.
Yeah, yeah. No, I absolutely hear you. And uh, like I mentioned, when you turn up to speak at the deputation, you realize that the councillors do genuinely care about the issues. They're operating under tough constraints, or they also have information asymmetry, right? Like they're not necessarily privy to the
Totally.
voices of everyone. They're hearing predominantly from Rob lobbies. So this just makes the whole system align far better.
Yeah.
Um, but I think now would be you mentioned the team and 35 people who are working
Yeah.
on it. Everyone a couple of times now. I think it's a good time to dive into one the genesis of the project.
Sure.
How did you as Ilya realize that this is something that is needed? Like, what's your story? How did you come to care about this thing? And then this whole force of Civic Tech Toronto that has been instrumental in bringing this to life, because like you pretty modestly mentioned that you are the animating force behind it, but it is a lot of people uh, who are needed to actually bring this to life.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, where to start here? Well, I mean, in brief, over the pandemic, I was working at a large tech company, having like recently graduated from engineering school, but had a fair bit of spare time to do a lot of reading and work on what I would now call civic technology efforts, so volunteer tech efforts, lending whatever like combination of like engineering, design, and organizational skills I might have acquired. Yeah, I mean, in doing this reading, kind of came to a similar alignment that I believe you share around the meta crisis and the idea that there are many really important system level problems in the world that are critically underaddressed, and further, to my eye, are not well aligned with profit and the profit incentive to address. And so I wanted to like dedicate as much of my work time as possible towards addressing those problems. Not that I don't think that there are problems that important problems that could be properly addressed with a profit incentive. I just trust that those problems will be addressed because smart, hardworking people are well incentivized to work on them. Like yeah, and I thought that democratic engagement and specifically evening out and reducing power concentration with democracy as a core lever was one such critically underaddressed problem. I, a little while later, ended up working for this Canadian company called New Mode, which makes digital technology for progressive campaigners and activists. And there I had like the real like privilege of like seeing the back end of a lot of progressive campaigns, seeing some of what worked, seeing some of what didn't, and seeing like the challenges organizationally that a lot of these campaigning organizations have in informing a public and bringing that public to like the right levers in government to get the change that they need. And yeah, like a really, really tough task. And so, first of all, I saw just how undergunned the people are with respect to like technology and organization in this case. But secondly, I saw a lot of the pitfalls of the nonprofit model. Because there I saw really like smart, passionate, low ego, hardworking, just like brilliant people all around who are working on really important problems within the nonprofit space, and making good headway, but they were doing this despite the fact that it seemed like 70 to 80% of their time was spent just trying to make ends meet. On like a nonprofit level, like get funding and keep their organization afloat with like really limited resources. And then even the 20% of the time that they got to work on the problem they actually want to work on was really affected by like the funding model and structure. And so when I left New Mode, I thought, okay, if I were to do this, there's no reason for me to believe that within the same system I would have different results. I don't think that I am like much smarter or harder working or anything than any of the people that I saw. And so I thought, okay, I would love to just directly work on the problem without thinking about like how it is funded, and just like fund myself by living as cheaply as possible, and therefore making enough money in as little time as possible. And so that was kind of the life structure that I had set up. But at the time, I thought that it would be a somewhat lonely journey. And then somebody pointed me to Civic Tech Toronto. And so Civic Tech Toronto is this group of people who have been working on civic technology, just free technology in the public realm, for going on 10 years as of this recording. So really consistently meeting up on a weekly basis without missing a Tuesday, at this point, both in person and online, and both like having important discussions about these things, but also building really, really cool projects, like things like public noise meters so that we can like measure excess noise in the city to start legislating it, or like a bike parking map so that both where bike parking is in Toronto and also can report when it's broken, like a democracy kit to like reduce the friction of people running for office, like all kinds of awesome project. And so at that point I was like, oh, like I am not like alone in this. I knew there were other people doing it. I didn't know that they were so powerfully in community in Toronto. And so I started attending those sessions on a weekly basis, helping out with projects where I could. And then I ended up going to this gathering called Democracy Exchange in Toronto, which is an annual gathering of policy wonks who talk about democracy and how to steward it healthily across a number of factors. And so there I was definitely less expert than everybody else in the room. I'd like read some books, but a lot of people there were like had spent decades working in these fields, like across a variety of entry points, right? And what I heard repeatedly was people talking about how we need to engage like way more people, which I agreed with. But then the solutions they were talking about were incredibly like technical, wonky, and like policy focused in a way where I experienced what I'm sure lots of people experience when they listen to two engineers talk to each other and think they're comprehensible to non-engineers, right? I heard like very technical folks engaging with each other in a way where like I put up my hand and say, hey, I don't understand what you're saying, and like I chose to come to this conference and am like really trying to understand. And so I'll say like if I don't get it, probably most people won't get it. The other thing that they talked about was this whole like think local, act global idea. Or sorry, think global, act local. But there was very, very little actual implementation on a local level. And so I think like I came away from that being, okay, if this group of people isn't thinking in this way or isn't doing anything on the ground in this way, like actually doing like systems change instead of telling people to care more, if nobody there is like doing the kind of technology building that, for example, like New Mode was doing, but building it as public infrastructure, I mean, somebody's gotta, and now I'm in a group of people who are like interested in doing so. But even still, at that point, I wasn't like, we're going to do a project. Civic Tech Toronto had had like an open slot for a speaker. I had recently been to Democracy Exchange. My background is in user experience, so I put together a little presentation on like the UX of democracy. This is an idea that I had first heard from Dave Meslin's brilliant book Teardown. And so he's a Toronto legend and has done like a ton of work in making democracy more accessible and getting people more excited about democracy. So I heard the term there and, put together this presentation on thinking about democracy as a technology. And if we do think of democracy as a technology, how do we improve its UX? Why is it that democracy is this only technology where we blame the user versus with pretty much any other app? Like if it's not usable, we blame the creators, we blame the interface, and we say, hey, make it easier to use. With democracy, for some reason, we call people dumb and unmotivated for engaging with it. And how might we flip the script on that, right? So I didn't have a project idea. I just kind of like bandied about the concept and we talked about it. But then like 4 or 5 people messaged me saying, hey, is there a project here? So, a few weeks later, I pitched it at Civic Tech Toronto saying, hey, like, I didn't have the name Civic Dashboard, right? We were saying, hey, what if we were to try our hand at building a better interface for the city of Toronto? I don't know what that would look like specifically. Here are some ideas, but let's talk about it. and really smart people showed up, like people with like engineering chops who were like, okay, like here are like the data structures that we see in the website, and like here's what we pull out. People with design chops who were talking about, okay, what are the personas and like what kinds of like flows would we use? What are the core use cases? What are some of the pain points we're looking to address? How does this happen right now? Doing designer things. People with like a research and policy background showed up saying, okay, like on legislative and policy mechanic levels, what are the things that currently happen in the city? How would we best explain this to people? How would we make this accessible? Where should we point people to? And so on and so forth. And so pretty quickly, my job wasn't to do like any of those things. It was to like help organize this group into a structure that takes the best from things like startups and like nonprofits, and adapts it to an organization that has a lot of people contributing a little bit of time on a regular basis. That was in July of 2024, and we launched in April 2025.
Wow, that's brilliant, and it's it's very helpful to hear the whole arc of your journey,
Yeah.
because I think it helps people realize that you know. Sure, you have an engineering background. A lot of people have those skills, and like, but mostly you're a person who saw a problem out there. Like you started learning a little bit more about it, and as you started learning a bit more about it, you're like, oh, this doesn't make sense, or what if this could be a little bit easier? It was just you following your own curiosity, and as you kept doing that, things became more crystallized in your head, and suddenly you also found the resources to actually do something about it. Like often when we think about solving any of the bigger problems in the world, we tend to think of them as this monolith, and we're suddenly trying to think of like, okay, solve them in our head, right? Like you're sitting over here, and suddenly how do you flip it tomorrow? But no, like this was very much a journey for you, right? Like just learning about the problem and just following your nose, basically.
I mean, for sure. I think that's really well put. I'll also say it's a journey that like I feel like I'm in the very early stages of. And I think I might forever feel that way. Right? Because like whatever, the world or Toronto or even like Toronto's municipal government, like they're hyper objects. They're things that are like way too big to just keep in view at all times, right? And so sure, you can have a plan, but that plan's going to run across reality, right? And so like the plan, it's not like the plan has to be to do something, do it with people, and like lay out the values that you're like proceeding from, and then trust that A, other people will do the same, and B, that can lead to good outcomes. Like that's really it. I think like early on when I like came to the realization that the results or whatever, like the impact I seek to have will probably not happen in like a for-profit setting. The advice I got from a lot of people is like, step one, get rich. And like do the money thing, go to San Francisco, and then in doing so, either get rich enough to at least like fund myself so that I don't have to worry about money, or maybe get even richer than that so I could fund like a large number of people. And without getting into like all of the problems with that model, I think like the core problem there was that it almost presumed that I was like, hey, I'm going to know exactly what to do. You know what I mean? Like, and so if I just were to just get enough money to like have the freedom to do it, I'd be able to, right? That's not been the truth at all. Like, I just know so much more now than I did last year or 2 years ago. Like the ideas of like what's worth doing consistently evolve. Like they proceed from the same values, but I'm open to being changed by information and like the things that I'm learning from. And so like the idea that I wouldn't be affected in the other direction by like spending 5 to 10 years in for-profit land over there, or like the idea, like that seems like self-evidently false. I mean, I am also confident that as much like I will know at least as much more in 2 years relative to me now as me now does relative to me 2 years ago. And that I hope that continues to happen every 2 years. And I think that if it doesn't, then I would ask what is it that I'm not learning that I probably ought to be, right? But that learning, like I love reading and I love engaging with intelligent people on this kind of thing. But the biggest learning has come from doing. Like there's, I think like only by doing do we get to somewhere new, and only by doing do we find kind of like the glitches in the world, like the cracks that you initially think you're crazy for seeing, but then can actually can do something with.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Finding those glitches and cracks, and then just basically breaking them wide open. And again, you're not having to do it alone. Like as you've walked the path, like this point that you made earlier, like you realize that others care about it, and they come together, right? Like you found this powerful group, which
Yeah.
improved your learning and like really build the momentum around this whole project.
Totally. I think that's like that's one of the like biggest points of pride here, and also is not like the website's great, and it'll continue to get better, and like I'm confident in like the impact that it can and will have. But the fact, like learning to build with people, in this kind of like in a democratic way, like the website is built democratically, and learning to do that has been amazing, right? And has completely changed my mind on what's possible. Like we joked even from like 2 months into the project that if this were a startup, it'd be worth millions of dollars just by dint of the people working on it, right? Like you've got like we're not compromising on like the quality of people who are working here. These are like brilliant folks, not even just folks I'd work with. Most of the people, like people on this project, people I'd work for, right? Like people where I'm like, if they were like, hey, I'm starting a company, I'd be like, yeah, like I'd work for you, like really like genuinely great people. And the trick, and one that we figured out together, is like how do you collaborate, right? Like what kinds of tools do you use, what kinds of structures work, and it's like required a fair bit of unlearning. Like for example, we don't work with deadlines, right? Every workplace I've ever been in, there have been deadlines, and we realize that those are like unnecessary and false in this context. Like we don't like we document a fair bit more than like most companies I've been at, because what that means is that you can put the work down and somebody else can pick it up. Like we or at least like I'm constantly thinking about like how do we make it so that too much does not rest on any one person? How do you make it so that this project is easy to join? How do you reduce the communication load like inside of this project? How do we take the best things from startups, from nonprofits, from open source projects, from volunteer groups and organizations, and use the things that work and don't be prisoner to the things that don't, right? Like even things like, for like small example, for UX design, we defaulted to using Figma to start, which is that is like the default the interface design tool. The problem with Figma is it costs like $30 per person per month, which could be fine if you're working 60 hours a week for a startup or like 40 hours a week for Microsoft, which is of course like a funded and profit-making entity, and also you're working there a lot. But it doesn't work if we've got 10 designers contributing, and they're contributing on and off, and we don't have any money coming in, right? Like that would leave us with like what, like a $3,600 bill a year. Like we shouldn't do that, right? So we find an open source alternative. Like things like this, like things like consistently saying, okay, is one person doing too much? How do we like document what that person does and distribute it to more people? Seeing like an item that needs working on as an opportunity to bring another person in, right? Like if the website were to disappear tomorrow and the project were to fall apart, which we have no plans to do, but if that were to happen, the big win here is still that you now have 30 people who not only believe that this kind of work is possible, but are able to tell others about it, right? Like the learnings are the most open source thing here, right? I like every time somebody from our group goes, hey, I want to spin off a different project, I'm so excited about it, right? Because that means that like this practice of developing civic technology, of building for free in the public sphere, is one that like spreads. It spreads like through our city and beyond. Like that's the thing. Like on like a meta level, it's not even a question of just more people participating in our government. It's more people participating in this kind of collaboration and system building, which I think has a world of potential to address the kinds of problems that right now are being thorny to address for governments, for companies, and for nonprofits. It's like it is a new way of collaborating, and one that we're not inventing, but one that is like significantly less documented and even like well known as a model than any of the other three.
I love it. There's just so much wisdom in there, in those little nuggets that you threw out, as part of uh, actually how do you collaborate at scale so that the project is able to sustain for long? How do you document everything,
Yeah.
like so that anybody can pick up any of those pieces, which are important? Um, like a question that comes to my mind is that so you mentioned that there are 35 people who are working on this project. It's taken you about 10 months to put this out, and you're not working with deadlines. How much time do you think a typical person would be putting towards this project, every week or every month? Because, like, I assume if somebody listening in could be thinking that maybe that this is all well and good for some people, they can afford to put in the time, but
Mhm.
I don't. I have got family responsibilities, etc. I can't really, do something of this sort.
100%, right? We think about that all the time. Typical. I think we've, to flip the question on its head, I think we've embraced atypicality, right? I think that in the corporate structure, typically people bend their lives to the work, right? So it's like regardless of whatever else that you had going on, at least like 9 to 5, you're available here, right? We try to make like the minimal possible standard for that to happen. And so there's some people where they're between jobs and like they're putting in like whatever, like 10 to 15 hours a week at stretches on this thing, doing like maybe like design or engineering, right? There's other people where, like most of the people who are working on this like do have full-time employment. And so they are like hacking on this like some evenings and on weekends. We only have one formal meeting a week, which is like at Civic Tech Toronto Hack Nights, like Tuesdays 8 to 9, right? And so people try to make those, but if they don't, that's totally okay. There have been people who like contributed like pretty heavily for a few months, like they were like putting in probably like 10 hours a week. And then they had a dense period at work. So they left for like 2 to 3 months and then they came back. Like it's rejoinable in that kind of way. Like there's just like these different pockets of availability that are there. Like I'll speak for myself. This is not my full-time gig, right? Like this is not, like as I mentioned, this is a fully volunteer run. So I am trying to design it in a way where I am putting in like at most 20 hours a week. Right now, building up to launch, I was probably putting in a little bit more than that. But truly, like when I've said like I haven't worked that hard on this, like I mean it. Like I think about it a lot, but I don't. I haven't been putting in 100-hour weeks to like compensate for the rest of the team. Again, like I don't code on this thing. I don't design on this thing. I like rarely write. I anytime I look at it and say, oh, this will require me putting in 40 hours, right? My next thought is, how do I distribute that work? Because there is an infinite well of in like Toronto, and I think in the world, but definitely in Toronto, of talented, highly passionate, low ego people who want to contribute to things, right? Like the question is, how do you make like a socket for them to plug into, right? How do you make a shape of work that they can align with? So I think that's the expansive answer to your question. I think for the first 6 to 7 months, I thought to myself, okay, make yourself like routinely available, like set aside like the at least like 15 hours a week so that you are able to work on this like consistently and be available to onboard people and kind of like help give the project shape. But I think something like 4 months in, I took a 5-week vacation. Like 4 months in, like, and I don't know, me, like I like answered like 1 or 2 Slack things, but like I well and truly fucked off, and like that took some setting up, but like we had two people with product management experience who joined, like Jasper and Manvi. They were amazing. And like we have an engineering team where like people do a really good job of internally communicating. Same with our design team. I came back 5 weeks later, the project had grown, people had joined, right? And so I think like setting it up in a way where it is not reliant on me or any other one person is really important. Because we also have to think like, we are like, yes, this is an experiment, but we are gunning toward this being infrastructure, right? Like we want this to be like infrastructure into the long term. We want it to be so that if you say I've subscribed to alerts from Civic Dashboard, if something comes up a year from now or 3 years from now, you can rely on it. Like you know that that's still going to be a thing that's there. This like the design is for it not to be a flash in the pan. And so if I get very sick, this thing should continue. You know, if like, in I think tech organizations, but in general, talk about this thing of bus factor, of which is how many people need to get hit by a bus in your organization before everything goes to shit. And we try to, yeah, that's the bus factor. It's evocative. And we try to keep that bus factor as high as possible. And the things with that is like not putting too much on any one person's plate, documenting, like being like very like open task management. Being an open organization, like we should be better about this, but like writing up what we've done like on like a month-to-month basis and like emailing that out. All of our communications are publicly available on the Civic Tech Toronto Slack. All of our tasks publicly available on our GitHub projects. Just really, really being like open about everything that we are doing, so that even actually if everybody fucks off, right, someone else can like potentially pick it up, dust it off, and keep going. Right? Like that's, and I know that like sounds like the pipe dream, and that's not what we're looking to do, but resilience is at the core of what we're doing here. And as much as there are challenges to working in a volunteer run kind of way, boy, are there also advantages. We don't think about runway. Nobody can pull our funding. Like there are real upsides to it too. So it's an interesting shape of work.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
A very unique perspective on how to move things in the world. And I think that frictionless that you talked about, helping people onboard and roll off the projects very easily, helps people contribute as much as they can, or as little as they're able to on certain days. I think that's very, very key, because
Mm-hmm.
like you don't have to be investing 100 hours a week or even a month to be able to change things in your life, right? Like you rely on this distributed power of others who care about things, and do things together. The other thing which really struck me was this, typically in economics or capitalism, there's this notion that people are fundamentally selfish and always acting in their self-interest, and if there is no monetary incentive, you're not going to really move anything. And this project just very clearly demonstrates that's not true. Right.
I always just laugh when I hear that. I know that's not like the thing you believe, but I always just laugh when I hear that, right? Like the idea of like, because I also think that like a lot of the people who say that would say, not me, but like people, and they go, well, if not you, then why people? Like, why do you think that, why do you think that's the case? God, there's two things that come to mind here. There's this brilliant book by a psychologist named Alfie Kohn called Punished by Rewards. And in it, he talks about basically how so much of our society is structured on this do this and you'll get that. Type of mentality where, whether it's by reward or punishment, it's like this like if then calculation. And that like the psychological foundation for this comes from B.F. Skinner. It's Skinnerianism, right? Or Skinnerism, which is this idea that we don't really have free will, that we're kind of like input-output machines, and that like we just do whatever we're incentivized to do, and that these are just exclusively very material incentives, and that everything is downstream of that, basically, right? But a lot of the experiments that justifies like Skinnerism were done on, first of all, on rats, and second of all, they were done on half-starved rats. So basically the conclusions you could draw from Skinner's experiments are, a starved rat will do things for food. And so, which cool, you're a genius, right? And extrapolating that to people is wild. Like people clearly have all kinds of selfless motivations and like more complex motivations than like, will I get money? Will this benefit me personally? Like motivations like being in community, like seeing the world like aligned with values, like serving, like combating despair, working on things that are interesting, like pursuing curiosity, play. Like all of these are these like wonderful motivations that people pursue, and like a lot of the best things in the world come from those. And like there's so much more fascinating in that book, but like one of the things he talks about there is that extrinsic reward often dampens intrinsic motivation. So like one of the best ways to get a kid to stop liking poetry is to start giving them gold stars based on whether or not they do poetry well. That's a great way to get a kid to not like poetry as much. And so it's not even a question of like you can make do without them. It's that there's real advantages to continuing to making do without them. Is that you can continue, and like look, there's like I don't mean to like purity test this approach. Good work should be paid for. I want more of this kind of work to be paid for. Even if like, never mind our organization, I would love it for there to be more consistent funding sources for pro-social projects, like 100%, right? But also there is a different and interesting shape of project that happens when people are doing it on a volunteer basis, or like work that happens when people are doing it like almost exclusively out of like passion and belief. And that is, it takes that basic economic tenet and tosses it in the trash, like experimentally.
I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. And there's such an important point that you mentioned, that we think, even if we are thinking about incentives for people to work on this, we have to think about them holistically, right? Like the economic machine just thinks about this monetary incentive being the only thing that drives people, but community, agency, feeling a sense of hope, play, curiosity,
Yeah.
yes, such fantastic motivations. And there's a lot of research which shows that being poor can make you unhappy, and it does, but being
Yes.
rich will not contribute to your well-being beyond a certain point, right? Like it is these things that you talked about, which really makes for a happier person. So it's great that, and being in community with Civic Tech Toronto or any other such project is likely to provide that. And but this point that you said about pro-social work being kind of rewarded, uh, I remember a previous conversation that we had, and we talked about whether the government should fund something of this sort. And you mentioned that ideally you didn't want that, because that would mean that if they gave the funding for it, they could also pull it away. So, and being volunteer led like gives you that sense of independent infrastructure power as well. Um, but
Yeah,
before you respond to that, like I also want you to answer, like, when you think that this work should be rewarded, if not the government, then how would we fund this? Like some kind of crowdfunding models, foundations, or this is something you'll figure out along the way.
yeah, no, it's something we talk about a fair bit. Yeah. So just to the first point, it's not that I would be inherently like against funding. It's more that I and like we would need to see it as something that is like useful to our goals, right? Like even on this like very basic like we would need to do a few things. One, we would need to really clearly delineate between like volunteer and paid work, and make that be a thing that is like very explicit and like agreed upon within the organization. Because a lot of the work that is being done within the organization right now, like I don't know, programming is the kind of thing that is regularly very well compensated, right? Or like design or research. Like these are all people who like get paid to do these things, right? And so yeah, if all of it gets switched to paid work, again, we would need like millions of dollars in funding on an annual basis to like make up for this work. Um, But yeah, I think the second bit is a question of incentivization, right? Like if a core part of what we do is hold the government to account, and the government is the thing that is funding it, maybe like this iteration of the government would be like the one that goes like, oh yeah, like we want this, but it could get pulled the next year. And again, once something goes from volunteer run to like funded, going back from funded to volunteer run, I believe to be like quite difficult and like likely to result in something dying. And there are some interesting kind of case studies to back that up. Yeah, but in terms of like what should fund this, I think like as with my personal life, I don't know, like I think that the design of this thing is meant to require minimal funding. And so basically like if I don't have a burn rate, I don't need a runway. Is it in startup speak, right? So like right now we are getting all of our labor for free, and like our all of our tooling basically is free as well. And so like as we scale up, we'll probably have somewhat greater tech costs, but we don't think they'll hit six figures. Like we hope that like like donations are the kind of thing that can cover that. And then like past that, yeah. I mean, like I think like there are grants from the government. There are things that there are foundations that can fund these kinds of things. Like there's like interesting examples from like other tech projects like Mozilla or Wikipedia, right? Where like they are quite donor based, but those are like really like mass use products. Like ours is one that where we aren't. It's not that we're not aiming past Toronto. It's that like we consider Toronto to be scale, and we just are trying to build something that people in Toronto love. And so it's not like we don't want to be like, oh, we have to scale to like 20 cities to be able to like scrape together enough donations and funding for it to work even in Toronto, right? Like those are bad physics for us. That's like again falling into the startup trap of for this to be useful for 10,000 people, we need to convince venture capitalists to invest in it, which means that we need to tell them that it'll be useful for 10 million people and build it as such. Like that's or if it's 10,000 people, those people better be rich. And so, yeah, like we don't want to fall into that. We instead, the idea is to build out like a really like scalable volunteer run infrastructure, right? The kind of thing where you can say, okay, like there are roles within the organization that are like organizing roles. Let's say like somebody who like plays like a quasi like CTO role, somebody who plays this like lead organizer role, maybe like a couple of others. And similar to actually our parent organization, Civic Tech Toronto, we rotate those roles annually, right? Like Civic Tech Toronto is actually a fascinating example of exactly what we're talking about. It's been running for 10 years, never had revenue, never had paid organizers, and is an incredibly high functioning organization. And we have volunteers on a month to month basis doing things like ordering the samosas or like being the MC or online MC or doing AV for the meetings. But then you also have annual roles like archivist or like doing like communications and promotions or being like the chair of the organization, right? And those are roles that have to rotate on an annual basis, which means that when you are thinking about yourself, you're not like, I'm going to be doing this for 5 years. You're saying, hey, like I am looking for succession, right? I am designing this role for myself to be replaced. And that's clearly that can happen on a highly functional level for an organization for 10 years. We don't see why that can't be applied here, especially given that what we do is far more digitally underpinned than something like Civic Tech Toronto, which has an in-person meetup every week. I feel like the bar there is far higher than the bar for digital product, where the potential for collaboration is far broader.
Fine. So there's a few segues that we could take from your like natural extensions of the conversation. One, you mentioned that it's not like you're not thinking of scaling beyond Toronto, but Toronto is its own scale. That's a very good framing. It's a trap a lot of us can fall into when thinking about impact in the world. But how does this actually go beyond something like Toronto and from a few different scales? So one could be just going to Montreal or Vancouver, or going across the border to United States or other developed countries. but also just thinking broader, like when you're thinking about developing countries where the democracy might not be as functional as we have in Toronto. So how like do you think about those pieces, and if so, in what manner?
Uh, we do all the time, and we try not to have them distract us. And so, but let's talk about them. The most open, like all of our code is open source. We're trying to make our documentation like all like fully available and like there for somebody to trawl through. All of our communications are like open and available like on a Slack, and we have an email newsletter and all of that, right? So we're trying to be like as open as possible there, and in theory somebody could copy our code, but forever the most scalable thing, the most open source thing about this will be the story, and the fact that this is possible, right? And that's already happened, right? Like we're only here because there are people who did this and far more in Taiwan, right? Like this is like there's that story's already scaled. They don't even know about us, right? And they've already done it. You tell them. But yeah. So like I think when I think about, let's say, scaling horizontally to like Montreal, right? Like another like a nearby major Canadian city. Sure, like we can say, hey, you can copy some of this code, but like the data inputs are going to be different, and the like the political culture in Montreal is going to be different, right? Ideally, what happens is we talk to civic tech people in Montreal and say, hey, this has worked in Toronto. Why don't you try doing something like this here? And like we'll help you, like whatever questions you have, like let's be friends, like, let's be like sister organizations, more so than us being like Civic Dashboard is now something that like has to go city to city. We could do it that way, but this being a thing that the people in a city take like their responsibility for is like the core important point. Scaling more horizontally to like, let's say, like the US and other cities, we're not like the only initiative like this that exists, like far from it. Like there's an initiative in the US that has existed in multiple cities called Councilmatic, that like does like pulls out a lot of council data. I think they're almost like more focused on like the open data element of it, rather than the usability from what I've seen. But then usable things are built on top of that. So for example, like Councilmatic started in Philadelphia, got implemented by volunteers in Chicago, and then there was a volunteer effort called Windy City, a play on Windy City, Chicago, to then use data from Councilmatic there. So again, you trust that other people are going to follow up in this way, and the open source thing is the story. In terms of scaling vertically up to like other levels of government, even like up from Toronto, right? So let's take like Ontario and let's take Canada. Yeah, there's cool projects that exist like this with respect to Canada. There's Open Parliament is like an old one that's existed for a long time, built by one person. That definitely has made was like an early civic tech effort towards our federal government. There's a recent one called just simply Civics Project that is being run by like mostly one person. And yeah, you can put your email in and you will understand like what is happening, or you will better understand what is happening on a federal level. But like the calls to action are different, right? Like I can't go depute at our federal or provincial parliament, right? Like there's different physics to that, right? And we can integrate it into our platform over time. But the conversation would be a different one. Like yes, I can email my MP or my MPP, but again, there's not as much. And in terms of scaling to the rest of the world, I mean, yeah, like digital democracy, I mean, I don't know if it's having a moment or I'm just new to it, but yeah, there's like a lot of people who are engaging with this more and more, both like with the example of places like Taiwan and Estonia, but also like, yeah, this like real more global sense that our democracy is one that could be both more transferred into the hands of the people and also more broadly accessed using digital democracy. Or using digital tooling. I mean, like this was, to wax poetic, this was the vision for the internet, right? Like, is this like corporatized version of the internet we have where it's like 5 websites, each mostly filled with screenshots of the other 4. Like that's like a pretty recent version of it, and it doesn't have to be that way into the long term, right? Like it's the idea of, again, distributed power and like distributed and like more equalized access to information. We're so new to the internet, right? Like think about how many forms like paper has taken and like print has taken as a medium that has impacted the world. Like 30 years on from Gutenberg's printing press, like what do they know? And like similarly to like what do we know about the way this digital technology is going to impact us? Like again, I am no expert on international development. Like I'm like, well, to the extent I'm an expert in anything, it's not that. But in a lot of ways, when you think about places that have like less of an entrenched like democratic culture, if you will, and democratic processes, there could potentially be even more of an opportunity to have these things built in from the start, right? Like, yes, we are building on the shoulders of giants, but we also have a lot of like unlearning to do within like democratic culture. Versus if a place has, is like coming into democracy for the first time, or like in a more recent way, they have less unlearning to do. I mean, there's this like recent example in Korea where like there was an attempted military coup that was overtaken by its people and overthrown by its people within the span of a few hours. Like they are a more recent democracy. They don't have like as long a culture of it, but that happened right there. And so like you almost imagine like would the same thing happen here? And it potentially is harder to imagine, but it's like inspiring to watch there. A country that is like more recent to democracy but believes in it so fervently, in a way where they were really really protective of it. So yeah, I think that like this scales out. I mean, the summary of this answer is that it scales out to other places, mostly by people understanding that it is possible, taking what works from other places, but really building for their locality. Which really brings us back to this like very first part of this conversation that we were having, right? Is that you have to trust that people elsewhere are going to take care of their place and address these like massive problems about like power distribution, climate change, like nuclear disarmament, like et cetera, like address, like do what they can to address them locally in their place, bespoke solutions to bespoke problems. Yeah, and yes, you can copy a little bit more digital technology, but at the end of the day, you have to trust that people in other places will do their part.
No, I love that message, and I think the important bit is also that it's not blind trust, right? Like because we're clearly seeing this already taking place in other places. You already mentioned Taiwan and Estonia. You also mentioned a couple of projects in the U.S. I'm wary of getting the name of this place wrong, but there's also a recent example that I heard in Syria, that has been completely war-torn, and I think the place's name is pronounced Rojava or Rojava. I don't know how you pronounce it. But basically, after the war, when they're trying to rebuild things from the ground up, they're actually building a direct democracy now. And they are looking to decentralize power. So it is a very powerful example of what you mentioned, that if the institutions don't exist in the first place, that you can try and build this from the ground up. Not to take away from the fact that there are people having real existential problems over there, and they have to first solve those issues. If they are, especially if people are living under oppressive regimes, there is a fight to even get to democracy in the first place. But if and when that happens, then these structures will exist for them to be able to get inspired from. I also really appreciate the humility that you didn't try to go and say that we can take this thing and it can just be copy pasted everywhere, right? Like it's you have to think locally about what would work in each of the places. So I think that is another nugget of wisdom, which I think we have to take away, that like a lot of the problems tried in the world stem from us thinking that we know better and trying to impose our solutions on others. So
Yeah.
much appreciate that. We are coming along on time. Now we are at an hour and 40 minutes. Um, Maybe before we wrap up, uh, we already covered a lot of lessons and challenges that you face. We covered more of lessons rather than challenges. Is there anything specific that you would want to highlight in that area though, like which you think we might not have covered?
Um, I think we covered the meat of it. Um, yeah, I there are big problems. They're worth working on, and they're possible to work on. And I think one of the earliest steps in doing so is finding others who are already doing so. Because I promise, like especially if you live in a city, I promise you they exist. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think we were ever meant to solve big problems alone. I think that's something that I have to continuously teach myself. You know, like a lot of my formative experiences have come from sports, and a lot of the ones that I first delved into very actively were individual sports, running and wrestling, which teach you like a real kind of well, and chess. And so these all teach you like a really specific kind of agency, like a real kind of like individual determinism that you can you are the master of your fate, the captain of your soul. That like you are the one who controls your outcomes. If you win, it's because of you. If you lose, it's because of you. And you know agency is great, but the world is more complex than that. The world's more complex than a chessboard. The world is far more stochastic than a chessboard or a cross country race, and it is far more collaborative than a wrestling match. It is far closer to a combination of I don't know rugby, basketball, and poker. And like you know like in those environments like step one is to make a team, and step two is to articulate the bets you make and make them. And like and you learn hand by hand. You know, I think that's been like kind of my biggest takeaway, and it both is like a continuous lesson in humility and like awe at other people. But it also you know I get anxious about like being like I don't know what I'm doing or like I don't know what I'm going to do next. And then I think like nor does the poker player before the cards are dealt. And there's really always a new hand, and the main thing that you take from hand, like sure, like the size of your pot like increases decreases, but the main thing that you take from hand to hand, from game to game, is learning how to play. And so yeah, I'd say like find your team and start playing, and take it from there.
I love that. I love that. Find your team and start playing. Um, so, do you have any advice for people in terms of how they can go about finding these people, right? Like, and I'll throw in a couple of examples to start,
Yeah.
and, right? Because a great example is how we ended up, meeting and talking. Basically, when I got concerned about the meta crisis, I thought, okay, I don't know remotely enough to be useful in solving this problem. So let me start learning, and let me just start putting it out into what I thought is the void of the internet. And through this, maybe I'll connect with some like-minded folks. And I was part of the Civic Tech Toronto Slack because I had heard about it from some other person in a random meetup event, and I ended up putting it into what I thought was a void over there, and then you ended up reaching out. So that is one way of doing it, putting your own thoughts and what you care about out into the world, and then that acts as a magnet to find others. But are there other levers like that you think people can be pulling? And uh, one in general, and second, if people want to learn more about Civic Tech Toronto or Civic Dashboard and like get involved, how can they do that as well?
Totally. I mean, yeah, I'll answer the second question first because it's very simple. We meet every Tuesday, 7 to 9 p.m. You can check out Civic Tech Toronto at civictech.ca. You can check out Civic Dashboard at civicdashboard.ca. Like we have like a contact email that you can email. We have a Slack you can join. We're there every Tuesday, but even if you can't make a specific Tuesday, reach out and we'll reach back out. We're pretty good about it. And so that's the local Toronto civic tech version of it. I mean, in general, I think like the answer comes down to like show up to something, and you might not show up to like the first thing, the correct thing first, but like being like, oh, where is there a meetup of people? Great, show up to that meetup. And look, often easier said than done. That's scary. That's like definitely social anxiety inducing. Like if you're an introvert, you might be like, fuck that. But yeah, you don't have to like show up and then broadcast yourself to 20 people. Like, I know people who show up to these kinds of things and then find the one person who they want to talk to. And then the conversation that ends up getting them further engaged is the one that they have on the walk back home from that meetup. Like people who are like completely silent the entire time. And then, like the important conversation happens afterwards. But step one is showing up. I would say like, yeah, so step one, like one version of it is show up. I mean, the other one is reach out, even if you're not going to like show up to something in person or like on a Zoom call or something like that. Like you mentioned the void of the internet, but like everything that's on the internet was posted by a person. And those people are just not, they're more accessible than you think. Like, hey, like I messaged you when you posted a thing. I got an email yesterday from like a student founder who saw our presentation and is like asking to chat. I'm looking forward to chatting with that person. Like people are usually passionate about the thing that they are like presenting about, and so like they're down to talk, even if you think that like the person's inaccessible. And if they said no, it's probably not because like it's anything to do with you. They're probably like busy and overloaded, frankly. And then like the last bit, I mean, like you're a great example of this, and this is something that I continuously try to be better about and like very much look up to you on, which is like put your ideas out there. And I would say don't be worried about your ideas not being original. A, because very few, on one hand, very few are, and B, like generally speaking, the path to originality lies through unoriginality. It's like step, and you don't get there in like one big leap. Like you get there by like chewing on it, and that's often done by like work and output. But then the final bit is that like even if your ideas are never like Socrates, Aristotle level original, which like I don't think like mine will ever be, most people's will never be, you sharing the way you share the ideas and the places you share those ideas in and the relationships that are formed because of that are by definition unique. And so even if what you're sharing is stuff that is like mostly stuff that you've like read or like thought about from elsewhere, go somewhere where you think people will be interested in your ideas and post them. And so that's if you never want to leave your room. But truly, most effective thing, show up to something.
Yeah, no, I love that, and just show up, and things will happen, right? Like, and really keeping it simple, like take that first step, and it feels really daunting, as with any new thing, but I think one key lesson for me from our chat is that one, it is easier than you think, and second, once you start walking the path, like the pieces start coming together, right? Like it is not this big monolithic problem that we imagine in our head. Like you start seeing traction if you try to put your wishes out there into the world and start trying to manifest them. So
Yeah. You don't know what you'll learn and you don't know who you'll meet. Like you just don't.
yeah, absolutely. I think that is a good note for us to kind of end our chat on. We are coming up on 2 hours. Thank you so much for taking the time, Ilya. For anybody listening, you've heard some great examples of how you can actually take steps to build the world that you want to see, and that there are wonderful people out there just waiting to join hands with you and take action. So I hope you found this useful, and will find the lessons from this implementable in your own life. Thank you so much for listening, and check out civicdashboard.ca and civictech.ca to see how you can get more involved in Toronto. And for anywhere else in the world, Google and Eventbrite and any meetups or any NGOs which are working on things that you care about. Those are your best friends. Reach out to somebody. I'm sure somebody will answer, and you will be on your way to making a difference. Cool.
Thanks, Akhil.
Thanks, Ilya.